Look, I watched the first 3 episodes and I was bored out of my mind. And the reason isn't not because I didn't think it was well done or that I think, I listened to Bill Simmons' podcast, his latest podcast. He had Schumacher on, and they were talking about it. And I thought Bill Simmons nailed it in that he said, look, we weren't trying to make a documentary for the 1%, for hardcore wrestling fans. He conceded that people like us and our listeners are going to know pretty much everything that's discussed on this documentary. And he also conceded that no matter how good or bad of a job that they did, we were all going to nitpick it and complain. And he wasn't concerned with that portion of the audience. He was making a documentary in hopes that 100 million people will watch it on Netflix who will learn something about Vince McMahon. And watching it through that lens, through the first 3 episodes, I think they did a really solid job. I can't say great job. I might be willing to say good job, but I'm 100% willing to say solid job. Okay. It's a massive undertaking to make a documentary about this man, particularly when halfway through the process, it all gets flipped upside down with the Janelle Grant stuff. I'm sympathetic to that. It flipped this thing upside down, and I'll be honest, I probably would have thrown my hands and given up on the project after being that deep into it with all these interviews. And now we have to completely change the end point, the tone, the goals, the through lines, and the fact that most of the footage was shot before anyone knew of that lawsuit and those allegations. It was a mess. I think when you consider all of those things, for example, I'm in the middle of episode, what was the one with all the scandals? Episode 2, right?
Yeah,
so episode two. I'm in the middle of episode 2, and, I'll just give you a good anecdote. TLB walks in the room, and she's not paying any attention to the TV, but the Rita Chatterton stuff caught her attention, okay? So she sits down on the couch and starts watching it with me, and they do the Snuka stuff and the Chatterton stuff. And I'm observing her. I'm like, this is good. This is good for me because I could observe her watching and see what questions she asks. I'm not going to say anything to her. I'm going to see how long it holds her interest and if she asks me anything, from that standpoint. I think for someone like her who knows nothing about wrestling, okay, when I met her, she could probably name Hulk Hogan and The Rock, and that's it. I mean, she couldn't tell you the difference between pro wrestling and MMA. Okay, she's one of those people. I think that from what I saw, it's a solid primer of who this guy is and how he came up and how he built the WWE. I think there's no doubt about it. I think from that standpoint, at least from the 3 episodes I've seen, Simmons has met the goal that he seeked out to accomplish. Okay? For me, it's like I said a couple of weeks ago why I initially wasn't interested in it. You cannot McMahon-splain me. There's nothing that I feel like these people can teach me about Vince McMahon. And through 3 episodes, my mind has not obviously been changed. I'm bored out of my mind watching this because I know all of this. Now, I'm not screaming at my TV at inaccuracies yet. I'm not doing a ton of that. Now, there's a few things I don't think they go deep enough into. But look, you can do a full hour on Snuka. You could do a full hour on the Ring Boy scandal. You could do a full hour on Chatterton. You could do a full hour on the steroid trial. They can't do it. So yeah, they left a lot of stuff out with some of these stories. They didn't go nearly deep enough on Snuka. They didn't go nearly deep enough on the Ring Boy scandal. Okay, but you only have 10 minutes tops on each of these individualized topics. And they have so much ground to cover with this guy's career and life that I can cut them a break for that. If they're trying to tell this guy's story for 100 million people and not the couple thousand people that are going to listen to you and me this week. And again, I'm only speaking on the first 3 episodes.
Right.
But I was bored. And the 3rd episode I found to be the most tedious because if there's one thing I've had enough of, it's the Monday Night War. I've had enough. It was just, that was the most tedious episode to me. And, I learned absolutely nothing, but I didn't expect to. So I'm not going to hold that against them because, again, they're not making a documentary for me. Okay, and they admit that. 2 little notes, and then I'll hand it off to you. Cody is such a bullshitter. He is just, and he was barely in the first three eps.
He sucks in the entire series. Yeah, and
he's
playing the Miz role. You know, have you ever watched any of those WWE A&E documentaries? It's like they'll talk about Andre the Giant, and then they'll go to the Miz, and Miz will be like, "Andre the Giant was larger than life," and you're like, "All right, thanks, Miz." You know, and that's all he just gives you empty platitudes. You pull the Miz string, and he goes, "It was unbelievable. I was watching at home, and my mind was blown." And it's like, "Thank you, Miz. All right, great."
The Miz and the Brooklyn Brawler are the two guys.
Yes, yeah, those guys. You pull the string, and they just give you empty platitudes about a wrestling event.
Cody is just, and this is speaking from seeing him here, but also my personal interactions with him. He's just he's a bullshitter. I mean, Cody, and again, he only appeared once or twice in the first three eps, but him just using the phrase sports entertainment and sports entertainer, I just want to vomit. You know, he's just such a worker.
He's such a professional liar. He's a professional liar. He's a professional liar.
This is a guy who was rallying against those terms when it suited him attempting to get over with a different kind of fan base. You see, he's just a total bullshitter.
He's a worker. Yeah, he's a worker, man.
So Cody's a total worker and bullshitter. And there was one Vince line in the first episode that really resonated with me, and that I made a point. You ever see the oh shit, who's that actor TLB wants to bang? DiCaprio. You ever see the DiCaprio gif where he's pointing at the TV like, "Oh, that's
of course."
That was me when Vince said the following. Okay, he was talking about the success of WrestleMania and how it was such a risk and how it ended up being a success. And he said, "Quote, I don't know if it was good for the industry, but it was good for me and my organization. And that's all that I care about."
Yeah, I wrote that, and it's in bold in my notes because I said, "There you go. What have we always said?
Always said about WWE and these people."
But these people will lie. Well, these people will tell you. Here, one of the best things about this entire documentary, one of the interesting things about this entire documentary, I should say, I think Vince McMahon bullshits almost the least amount of anybody in this entire thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's parts. Trust me. He bullshits a lot, and he lies a lot. But when he's talking about his business and his role in the business, his
methodology and his method.
Like he's right. What if we've been telling people this for 13 years and people argue? No. Here's Vince telling you, I probably hurt the industry, but I don't fucking care. I care about my company.
And let me make and then I'm going to hand it off to you because I talked a lot. That line, okay, and why I'm sitting there like DiCaprio pointing at the screen, all right, is exactly what I've been telling our audience when it comes to when people say this bullshit that Vince McMahon was the greatest thing to happen to wrestling and he made wrestling bigger and better and we owe everything to Vince. What have we always said? We said Vince was great for WWE. Vince made WWE bigger. Vince made WWE better. All of those things. Vince hurt pro wrestling. Vince was a massive net negative to pro wrestling and still is today. Vince McMahon made pro wrestling worse. He made his own company better. He made his own company bigger. He did great things for his own company. And people would come back at us and be like, "You're crazy, you're out of your mind." And here's Vince saying it himself. Here is Vince saying himself what we always say about Vince.
Right. My notes say, Vince, I can't believe I'm saying this correctly, points out, I don't know that WrestleMania was good for the industry, but it was good for me and my company, and that's all I cared about.
Yeah. And Vince made pro wrestling worse. Period. It's indisputable. And he admits it himself. And he said other things in the first three eps along those lines multiple times. He's like, "Hey, look, I don't fight fair. I don't fight fair, pal. And, it's about competition. If they couldn't hack it, they couldn't hack it. It wasn't my problem." You know, and it's, so that's one thing that I think our audience understands. But it's one thing I always try to express when I do guest spots on other podcasts or back when we used to tweet or when I do some writing or whatever. It's that, hold on now. Don't give their version of history.
Right.
That Vince made pro wrestling bigger and better because he didn't make it bigger. He made his own company bigger. And he didn't make it better. He just did all those things for himself and his own company. He made the entirety of the wrestling world worse. And those reverberations are still being felt today. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the first 3 weeks. I'm
glad you found that quote too, because it's great. Because then they cut immediately to Hulk Hogan being like, "Yeah, no, wrestling was no longer for cigar smoking old guys; it was for kids and families." And I'm like, "Fuck off! Watch a Mid-South match from 1982 and tell me there was no fucking kids in the audience. Half that crowd is children. Fuck off."
Or grandmas in the front row, which is what you never see anymore at every Southern territory with the grandmas in the front row.
Multi-generations. Yeah, they're multi-generations all throughout those shows.
Multi-generations. The world-class shows with screaming teenagers and little kids. I mean, come on. It's just such a load of shit, but we're preaching to the choir.
Hopefully all of you guys know that, but okay.
Our audience knows that. So anyway, Rich, the floor.
I will have more detailed thoughts, obviously, coming up on flagshippatreon.com, but I will tell you the first 2 episodes, I thought, okay, we're cooking with some gas here. I thought the first episode was very good in world building, letting you know about Vince McMahon's childhood, letting you know about how the WWF came to be, how he took the company from his father, how he bought the company from his father, and all that sort of stuff. Not a lot of bullshit in that first episode either. It was pretty much like, all right, yeah, this is. I'm writing notes, but I'm basically like, oh yeah, this is mostly good, except for Hogan and Jimmy Hart and a few of these other guys that are just again professional liars are lying about stuff. For the most part, this first episode is pretty damn good and solid. Episode 2, we get into it. We do controversies. We start out with basically Vince saying, I got popular and now all eyes are on me and all eyes were on our company. Boom. We go into the union busting with Hulk Hogan, who admits, yeah, I union bust. yeah, I did it. I told the rest of the guys and sued them off or whatever. You get to the myth of WrestleMania 3. You get to the steroid trial. You get to Rita Chatterton. And I'm like, all right, you get to the Mel Phillips, you get the Ring Boys. And I'm like, all right, now we world builded with the first episode. The second episode is now this house of cards is collapsing a little bit. How is he going to get out of this? Here's what's all happening. I thought it was good. Now, they didn't bring up Emily Feinberg at all. There was a few things they didn't bring up. But like you said, you can't do it all. I mean, I would probably find a way to fit in Emily Feinberg in some way, shape, or form. But they didn't do that. Then things get really weird in episode 3.
I'm not trying to cut you off. I just want to make it clear. I'm not saying, even with the limited time, that I would have handled all those topics the way that they did. I did think they missed plenty of key stuff. I'm just sympathetic to the fact that you don't have a full hour to do every single one of these controversial topics. Right. That's all.
You will be more upset,
have to leave
though.
Something out.
You did, but you will be more upset as if you continue watching, which I would not advise you to keep watching. I will tell you that right now. I would not advise you to keep watching, because if you
want me to get more upset, but don't you want me to get upset? I haven't been upset about this thing yet.
I don't think you're going to get upset. You're just going to get annoyed, because episode 3, which you pointed out, is very tedious. We start with the Wendy Richter screw job, and now we're doing, let's build the character of Vince McMahon. Let's do the Montreal screw job. And I'm like, God, I just wrote my notes. Basically, I have like 5 paragraphs of notes, and I say, this is a worthless episode. Why am I watching this? Like, what I thought was pretty good in episodes 1 and 2. Episode 3, we're just doing the Montreal screw job. Who cares? Who fucking cares? You know what I mean? Like, Vince survives. The theme of episode 3 is Vince survives the groundswell and the pressures around him, and now he's becoming a character on the TV. He made it through everything. WCW is emerging. I'm like, oh God, we're doing WCW shit. We get Eric Bischoff saying 83 weeks. I'm like, oh my God, fucking kill me. What are we doing here? But like you said, it's more the Monday Night Wars is episode 3. Have no time for it. Completely worthless episode, I thought. Episode 4 then goes back to the screw job. Talks about the building of the Mr. McMahon character. Talks about Stone Cold Steve Austin's emergence. Talks about The Rock's emergence. Talks about how the Attitude Era was great for WWF. Talks about how they were influenced by ECW. At this point, I'm like, well, now I'm just watching a WWE DVD now about the history of WrestleMania or the Monday Night Wars or whatever.
That's how I felt watching the first 3 eps. I feel like I'm watching it wasn't significantly better than the documentaries that WWE makes, with the exception of they had Dave Meltzer there to fact check people.
Right. Which was good. So
which was great. Dave is the star so far.
Oh my God. Him and Tony Atlas are the stars for sure. And
he
remain
grabbed my
the stars.
pecker. He grabbed my pecker.
Yeah, the best one. The really, really good one was I think that was in one of the episodes that you had already seen, where Yeah, Pat Patterson goes, yeah, I didn't much care for, or Atlas goes, yeah, I didn't much care for Tony, for Pat Patterson because he grabbed my pecker backstage or whatever.
And the interviewer was like, he grabbed your what?
Yeah, my pecker. He grabbed my pecker. And then the interviewer says, like, well, why didn't you tell anybody? And Atlas just cracks up. He goes, who am I going to tell? And the guy goes, Vince. And he goes, what? Vince?
No, before that, he goes, who am I going to tell? He goes, he's the booker.
Yeah, right. He's the second guy in power. He's the booker. You don't understand the industry. You don't understand the industry.
He's like, you could tell Vince and the guy and Atlas just he was howling. He's like, what? He'll just fire me. What do you mean tell Vince?
Right.
He's like, and like you said, he's like, you don't understand the industry, son.
Yeah.
He's like, he'll just fire me. You know? Yeah, just completely, yeah. Atlas and Melt, see, that's the difference. That's what makes this. You're just getting a retelling of the history, but you're getting it in a more straight way because you have people to kind of check these guys on, check your Bruce Pritchards and Vinces on
right.
And,
but you are going to
Hogan's, of course, on their bullshit.
Sure. But you are going to get a lot less of those. And this is where I really think this entire documentary falls off a cliff is 3, 4, 5, these episodes. These episodes are the history of Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation, not Vince McMahon. I think you can world build in episode 1 with Vince. And I get that you might need to bring up the screw job. And I get that you might need to bring up, WCW was kicking their ass. And I think you might need to bring up, then WWF responded or whatever. But 3 episodes getting us to basically, hey, here's how good the WWF was and here's how they adjusted. I don't need that. And I don't think anybody needs that. I likened it to, if I'm watching a Aaron Hernandez documentary, are they going to bring up George Halas and the history of professional football and the history of the New England Patriots? They're not.
No, probably not.
They're going to tell you, and I get that it's Vince McMahon's company, and he's the owner of the company, but we don't need all these details about the history of the company. The 100 million people are going to be bored by episode 4 as we're saying, and then The Rock, and here's The Rock cutting really cool promos. Hey, and then this guy happened, and then this thing happened. Oh, and we did this angle.
I think you're right, because while my wife was locked into the scandals because that was all new to her and she couldn't believe it. Like most people who aren't exposed to this are going to be blown away by these scandals. And what I said to her was, this thing's not
you ain't even the half of it. Say ain't even the half of it.
I'm like, we could have a conversation later if you want. And I could give you some, but you're right. I think the rest of what I saw would put her to sleep. She wouldn't even be interested. So yeah, I think that you're making a good point.
It's really fallen off, and I think that's one of the big issues is this thing becomes. It feels like they started off with we're doing a documentary about Vince McMahon, and then we're doing a documentary about the scandals that have involved Vince McMahon, and then they went back to no, what? Let's just tell the history of the WWF, and that's what it is. And we get a whole segment about the Undertaker streak. Who the fuck cares about the Undertaker streak? In a Mr. McMahon documentary.
That's a good point. I haven't seen it, so I can't comment, but I can't imagine a context where that would matter at all in a Vince McMahon documentary.
They sort of did it in a concussions were a big deal in the company, and Undertaker got a concussion in that match. But let's talk about the Undertaker streak first off. And then we're doing ruthless aggression. John Cena talking about ruthless aggression. What am I doing here?
Yeah, now we're just doing a history of the company.
Now we're doing the history of Vince McMahon's WWF. And I get that. Vince McMahon owns the WWF, so maybe you have to do that, but we don't need this. It's way too stretched out. So when I heard I heard Bill Simmons say this could have been 10 episodes, I was like, you're fucking out of your mind, man, because this thing needed to be 3 episodes.
This is the kind of stuff you can cut and flesh out the Snuka story.
Bingo. And that's what I'm saying. If you watch more, you're going to get more annoyed because I get what you're saying. I had the same thought too. Because episode 2, they're like, bam, this thing, bam, this thing, bam, this thing, bam. You're like, whoa, shit, I'm getting overwhelmed by all these controversies. But that was the idea. The idea was that WWF is getting big, and now all these controversies are coming up. You got the Belzer thing, you got the Stossel thing, you got the steroid trial, you have Rita Chatterton, you have the Ring Boys. It's like bam, 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 bam. And then the Snuka thing. You're going to say, wow.
In an hour. That was all in an hour. 55 minutes.
But then when you're doing 20 minutes about ruthless aggression, you're like, the fuck am I doing here? What is this documentary? Who is this for?
Yeah.
No, your wife is not going to care that John Cena came out and confronted Kurt Angle and said, "I have ruthless aggression," and John Cena's saying,
because she doesn't have the context of why that matters or why she doesn't care.
And they'll give you context of why it matters, but she's going to be scrolling her phone. She's not going to give a fuck that after the Attitude Era, the WWE struggled for storylines, so then they started to do a new thing, and Vince McMahon challenged people backstage to come up with new characters, and then John Cena came out, and you're already bored. You're bored hearing me talk about this, and that's what it was. Yeah. So that's where it really falls off for me, and I'll go into more details when I do my reviews on the Patreon. And then
don't give it all away.
No. And then episode 6 is good. It brings the thing back together a little bit, but episodes 3, 4, and 5, I was like, I am very out on this. What are we doing here? Why none of this is necessary. This could all be one episode. If you want to tell the history of the creation of the Mr. McMahon character, because one of the main points of this whole thing is how much different is Vince McMahon to the Mr. McMahon character, you can do that, but I think a couple of clips of Mr. McMahon yelling at people is fine. I don't need the entire story of Stone Cold versus Vince McMahon. I don't need the entire story of the Monday Night Wars. I don't need the entire story of ruthless aggression. I don't need Undertaker's streak. You know what I mean?
Wait, we're doing story beats of Steve Austin versus Mr. McMahon?
Yes.
Oh, that's on that. That's you could sum that up in 45 seconds and explain the dynamic and why it drew and why it turned. Yeah,
this is what I'm saying.
Saying.
If you did an Aaron Hernandez documentary, do you have to bring up the 1985 New England Patriots Super Bowl run? You don't.
Yeah. I think that one thing too, the episode 3 where they open up with Richter and the Spider Lady screw job, which to set up the Montreal screw job later, right? Which was the thing when I'm watching the Montreal screw job stuff, and what I'm thinking to myself is, if I didn't know anything about this, and I'm just a random person turning this documentary on, I'm my wife or I'm my brother who doesn't pay any attention to wrestling, Bret Hart just comes off like a whiner who's crying about a fake match, because they didn't provide any of the necessary context as to why Bret Hart was in the right. His contract, they didn't go deep enough into how he had creative control in his contract. They didn't go in deep enough how he was willing to lose the title in a million different times or places other than in Canada.
And it was not his final day. They didn't go into the lawsuit that made it so that he could not show up on WCW programming with that title because of a previous lawsuit. There was no way,
correct,
in any way, shape, or form that Bret Hart was going to show up on WCW programming with the title.
There was a billion different details of Montreal that they whiffed on, which were important not to whiff on, because they were trying to get across that the guy was screwed, but they did a poor job getting it across because they left out all those details. And what I realized when I was watching it is, only because I already know all of the blanks to fill in, do I understand what they're trying to convey here. Because if someone sits down and watches it that doesn't have all of that knowledge, they're going to come away from that segment thinking, man, Wendy Richter got what was coming to her, and so did this fucking crybaby. It's fake. Just lose the match. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they did a really poor job with that, and that was the entire theme of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
It was titled Screw Job. Well, it didn't come across like a screw job the way they presented it. It came across like this guy, Bret Hart, is a psychopath who's a mark for himself.
Right. He's talking about, I'm an artist, and what I do is art, and when
he disrespected me on national television. Yeah, but you didn't explain why. That's why, to me, episode 3 was the most tedious and the worst of the 3 that I saw. The first 2 were just boring.
I'd bail now then if I were you. Unless you have literally nothing else to do, I'd bail now, or if you want to, jump to episode 6.
I got to see it through now.
Enjoy. And there's little bits here. It's not to say that episodes 3, 4, and 5 don't have anything, but they have little bits here where we briefly talk about Sable. And we briefly talk about, the sexual harassment lawsuit that she which has a very, very weird part in it, just to let you know. So they talk a little bit about Sable, and they ask, so Vince, what about Sable and her sexual harassment lawsuit? And he goes, well, I don't really remember much about. He says, quote, I found the quote here. It says, quote, I don't remember much about Sable in regards to a lawsuit. All I know is she came back to work, which is weird. Mm. And then the interviewer says, well, you had an affair with Sable when she returned. And Vince's eyes, get big. And we hear someone in the background say, storyline. And Vince goes, yeah, storyline. And the documentary notes that is Paul Heyman talking and saying storyline.
No fucking way.
So I don't know who's there, but I think someone was always there when Vince was getting interviewed to kind of.
Did you listen to the Simmons pod?
No.
I can answer that for you. Okay. They said Vince would stroll into the interview area sometimes 10 to 12 hours late. Okay. He'd have them come there in the morning, and then he'd have the secretary tell them, oh, it'll be another hour. It'll be another hour. It'll be another hour. 10 to 12 hours later, he would show up
super
and sit
cool.
down.
Cool, dude.
And he would come with his entourage,
as
they described it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that explains he didn't come alone. So obviously he had Heyman there to help him cover his tracks, and he had an entire entourage every time he showed up. You know what I think happened here? Because it was Vince's idea to do this doc. Okay. He approached them, and it was before all the shit hit the fan. I think Vince knew he was cashing out. I think Vince thought he was riding off into the sunset with his $9 billion or whatever it is that he got. And he wanted this documentary to be the bow on his career. And he knew that they were going to want to touch on the controversial topics, but he's so cocky and sure of himself and that he can control narratives that just knowing what we all know about Vince, that probably didn't concern him that much. He probably thought he could handle all of that and weave it in the way that he wanted.
Well, at the time, he had all those buttoned up. When this documentary started, he had all of his things buttoned up. He had the Rita Chatterton thing buttoned up. He had as he says, I had a consensual relationship with her. And you know what? It didn't matter because the statute of limitations had passed anyway, which is like, whoa, that's a weird thing to say, but okay. But sure.
I think he saw this as kind of like a postscript to his career. Correct. And that he could control all of the negativity. And it's very interesting at the start of episode 1, he even says directly to whoever's interviewing him, you know, he's like, I could tell you some stories, pal. And the guy's like, all right, well, let's tell him. That's why we're here. He's like, no, I can't tell you everything. I'll tell you just enough.
Yeah.
I mean, he flat out says what I'm saying, that his idea was just, this will be good for me. I'm going to cash out. I'm going to tell my version of events. I'm going to skate on the controversial stuff because I'm Vince McMahon, damn it. And I'm going to tell him he's so cocky, he thinks he can pull it off. And now he worked himself into a shoot. Okay. Because the Grant stuff came out. He probably wasn't expecting that 2 years into the process. And he became deeply concerned over how this thing was going to be edited, which is why he put out that statement 2 days before.
And tried to buy out the production too. At one point said, here's a bunch of money, get rid of this thing right now. And they told him no.
Yeah. And then that's why he put that statement out to try to get ahead of it, because he then was terrified how this thing was going to be edited. You've seen it through. I haven't. So I can't speak on how they handled the Grant stuff. I don't think, based on what I've seen, and it's only half of it, that they've, I think it's been fair enough. I mean, I don't think that they've turned him into a hero.
No, Dave Meltzer's pointed out perfectly. If you think Vince is a monster, you think they went too light on him. And if you think Vince is a hero, they went too hard on him. It's right. It's right in that middle ground. Completely. I think they went easy on him, but I'm sure there's some WWE mark out there that's like, I can't. Who fucking cares what Dave Meltzer has to say? Oh, they don't know shit.
Right.
I'm.
Why would they bring up this story? We know that bitch is a liar. Like,
right.
Those kind of people.
It's right in the middle. It's right in the middle. They don't go one way or another with it, and that I was frustrated by that. And I think a lot of people should be frustrated by that because this guy's a monster. And I don't think they would have been this easy with a lot of other people. That if again, I think the problem is it's professional wrestling. And we can get this big, shiny Netflix documentary, but it's still professional wrestling. If this guy was Robert Kraft, that's not the way this thing is presented.
Look, episode 2 could have been 6 hours if you flesh out every one of those individual controversies. Episode 2 alone could be a 6-hour documentary on Mr. McMahon, the monster. It could be episode 2 and episode 6, and they could be stretched out into a 6-hour series. And you don't even, like you're saying, why do we need the history of wrestling to set all of this up? Well, maybe because this project started before all of the shit hit the fan. Maybe they would have approached it differently.
Right.
The problem
This was going to be a glossy, like you said, postscript on Vince McMahon's career.
Right.
It was very clearly that's what it is. And that's why some of the episodes feel very glossy. Like that 3, 4, and 5 feel like and they'll insert things here and there. They'll insert Owen. They'll insert the Benoit story. They'll insert Sable. They'll do a couple of things here and there. But
hey, they let Phil Mushnick go crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So, that credit to them for that.
For sure.
Phil Mushnick had his hand up. So.
Oh, yeah. He's an OG. He's an OG. Like, yeah, that's. I forget his quote, but he was like, why was I mean to the guy? Because he's a fucking monster. Or whatever.
Yeah. You're paraphrasing, but yeah. Because he's a deplorable piece of shit. Is basically what he said.
Right.
And it's funny because I think Vince is so gotten to by Mushnick that he loses his cool because he goes down this man had a vendetta against me for years and years. Like all that irrational Vince McMahon bullshit because, they did that whole thing about Eric Bischoff pushing his buttons and Eric being Eric. But I think Phil Mushnick is the person in this world who pushes his buttons more than anybody else.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, yeah.
Eric's like, I'm going to make him sell. Well, Phil Mushnick makes him sell with minimal efforts. And has done so for decades, and made him sell right here. As soon as they brought Phil Mushnick up to Vince was,
he just starts huffing and puffing.
This man had a vendetta against me for many years, and I could,
you'd have to ask him why he cared so much about what we were doing. So,
right, and his lies, yeah, all that.
I'm glad I'm glad, unlike those fucking feckless Death of WCW guys, that they had Meltzer and Mushnick in here because you needed those guys for sure.
Well, I'll say this, no matter what you think of this, these are real documentary makers versus they lost all my respect with the Who Killed WCW thing when it was basically entirely revealed that it was a Eric Bischoff whitewashing project. And that's why they didn't want Meltzer there because Bischoff didn't want Meltzer there. So, I mean, it's those guys forget it. They're completely written off to me. I didn't like how they handled that at all, and they lost a lot of credibility with me. This, again, based on 3 episodes. Now, I hear the Owen Hart stuff is rough.
It's not
what's your opinion on that? I heard the Owen Hart stuff is rough.
They did not do a good job with that. Yeah, a lot left out, and
that's going to annoy me.
Yeah, a lot left out. Brett is sympathetic to Vince and WWE more than he probably should be. They just kind of say, yeah, it was an accident. And accidents happen, and it's awful, but, they did what they could. And then there's obviously the, continuing the show, and Vince is just like, well, hell, I would have continued the show even if I fell down. It's a show. People came to watch a show. And Vince goes on and about the people in the audience didn't see Owen die, so they were confused and didn't know, so they wouldn't want to know why the show got stopped. It's like, okay. you could say, Vince, hi, we had an accident. That you saw the guy that just got carted away, the lifeless body that just got carted out of the ring, that person died. So the show is over now. You could do that. But he thought,
and nobody would have been mad.
Nobody would have been mad. But he's like, oh, it was black. The crowd was blacked out. So a lot of them didn't see him fall. So it would have been very confusing to them to cancel the show. And I was like, no.
Well, then
it
looks like he just makes a fucking monster of himself in that area rather than. You don't even need other people.
There is one important, I don't know what the episode is, but there's one important clip that I hope gets brought up over and over and over again, and I haven't seen it yet. They're talking to Vince. I think it's maybe at the beginning of episode 6 or maybe somewhere in episode 5, where Vince talks about, I have a very weird mind. I have multiple computers in my mind. One is talking to you right now. One is thinking about something else. And the other one has very strange thoughts. And the interviewer says, well, what's that computer thinking of? What's your mind? What's that mind thinking of? And Vince McMahon says, doing something fun. Sex. I'm thinking about sex.
Oh my God.
And then they just move on. And I'm like, well, that's a big one. I hope that one gets brought back.
Oh my God. Well,
and that's the one where I haven't seen a lot of people talk about that, but that's him basically admitting that he's got this, a very weird, wired sexual thing going on with his brain. And they do talk about how he was possibly sexually abused by his mother. They do a little bit about the Playboy interview. I think you could have done a lot more about the Playboy interview. We've talked about that. That's one of the most revealing things that nobody talks about, is that Playboy interview with Vince McMahon, where he talks about his pervasive, his very, very strange mind and his very odd relationship with sex that he has.
Well, because even if the stories in the Playboy interview, like the shoving the crushed leaves in the girl's vagina and all of that, even if all of that is bullshit and him talking shit, it still speaks to his mind,
right?
And the things that he can concoct, right? Exactly.
But interesting, yeah. That was a line where I was like, "Whoa, oh boy, that's a big line there, right there." But yeah, all in all, like, if you want to see it through, go for it. But I know that you are going to be dreadfully bored in those middle episodes, and I think this thing could have been condensed a lot. And I think
I've been dreadfully bored for 3 hours.
Yeah, so you're not going to get less bored. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I don't need a recap of St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And,
right.
I don't need that. I have no use for it. I think my instincts were good at the start. I don't think it's going to teach me anything. I'm not going to learn a thing. I haven't so far. So, you're right. It'll probably annoy me more than even bore me with some of this Owen stuff. And but it's weird because I don't think it's poorly done.
Oh, no. Production wise, it is very good. It is very well done. But I think, in terms of what you were going to,
I think an attempt was made to be fair so far from what I've seen.
Yeah.
But always with that caveat.
Yeah. I think that's for sure. I don't know that he ultimately deserves fairness, but that's where we'll where I'll differ from, Simmons and everybody else involved in the production, is I don't know that Vince McMahon deserved
completely agree
a fair thing. And I don't know if Vince McMahon was in the sports world and everything was the same, that that person would get a fair documentary the way Vince McMahon got a fair documentary here.
100%.